Fish, you are better off than me. I have no idea who I am.
Come on, are you talking to fish?
In the Cheongsong Valley, where even the size of protective custody inmates detained under the Social Protection Act have no way to escape. The Social Protection Act revealed itself in 1981 during the early period of the Fifth Republic's rule. Under the pretext of protecting society by isolating habitual repeat offenders with high risk of recidivism, the government additionally imposed protective custody when someone with 3 or more prior convictions for the same crime and a combined sentence of 5 years or more committed the same offense again. In the past, even if you committed a crime, you were released once you served the punishment for that crime. However, once this law was enforced, even after completing the sentence for the crime committed, one could not be released and had to serve additional time, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, etc., depending on the severity of the crime, at the protective custody facility located in Jinbomyeon, Cheongsong. After completing their prison sentence at Cheongsong Prison, inmates were immediately transferred to Cheongsong Detention Center No. 1, and after a considerable period prescribed by law, they were transferred again to Cheongsong Detention Center No. 2. Consequently, the detainees suffered extreme psychological pressure. One day in 1984, after working for 3 years at Busan Prison, my first assignment, I received transfer orders to Cheongsong Detention Center No. 2. The Cheongsong land that correctional officers were reluctant to go to because of its remote location and poor working conditions. The road, carrying my wife and young children on a truck over dizzyingly winding mountain passes, was nothing but desolate. My life as a correctional officer in Cheongsong began that way. My job at the detention center was as the supervisor in charge of the inmate workshops. In more than 10 workshops, work was carried out making paper products, wooden products, soccer balls, etc., and about 100 detainees worked in each workshop. So-called violent criminals crowded together, each working with knives, chisels, saws, etc., but there were only 1 or 2 correctional officers guarding them. At first glance, it seemed like major incidents would erupt daily, but order was somehow maintained and most detainees were getting through their lives without major problems. However, as time passed, the atmosphere became increasingly hostile. Most of the detainees were orphans, and the burden of prison sentences they carried at an average age of 30 to 40 was 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So they would only get to see the outside world when they had become practically elderly. If they at least had family or property, they could hold on to some hope. But thinking of their circumstances with nothing at all, they had no choice but to fall into a state of desperation. The food, clothing, and shelter inside the detention center were not particularly lacking, but that couldn't soothe the pain in their hearts. They were slowly sinking toward life's deep sea like a sinking warship. Not long after my appointment, I was patrolling the solitary confinement cells. Even within this fearsome detention center, housing notorious individuals from across the nation, those who caused trouble or had peculiar personalities, or those who couldn't get along with others and engaged in fighting or violent behavior, were isolated separately and confined in solitary cells. Locked in cells barely larger than 3 square meters, they often displayed near animalistic behavior. Whenever I inspected that place, I would carefully observe through the window bars the people confined in each cell. The heavy weight of lives worn down by long years of confinement was embedded in their expressions and movements. When they noticed someone outside the bars, they would glance out, and when our eyes met, they would reluctantly rise slowly and greet me. Rehabilitation. Just as every organization has its unique greeting phrase, here they shouted rehabilitation, meaning let's live anew. Each time they greeted me with this phrase, I would salute and pass by each cell. That day too, I was patrolling from cell to cell. Had I passed about halfway down the corridor, one inmate half rose and sat looking this way, taking a posture as if to greet me, naturally expecting him to shout, "Rehabilitation." I was halfway through returning the greeting when that fellow just stayed in that position, staring a hole through me. I passed his cell and reached the next one, but the image of him from moments before remained as an afterimage, evoking a strange feeling. No matter how I think about it, that look was definitely a challenge picking a fight with me. After hesitating briefly about whether to just pass by, the thought solidified. This is my first transaction since coming to Cheongsong. I can't come out losing, can I? Let me see what kind of guy he is. I turned back. Looking into the cell through the bars, sure enough, wasn't he still glaring outside with cold eyes? An intense staring contest broke out instantly across the bars. A tension-filled time continued, silently glaring at each other without blinking once. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. After quite some time passed, finally breaking the silence, the man in the solitary cell abruptly opened his mouth.
"What are you looking at?"
Instantly, a surge of defiance rose in me, and I shot back. "I'm looking at you. Why?"
"Why are you looking?"
"Because I want to look." The absurd quarrel escalated excessively until he began foaming at the mouth. Unable to contain his rage, he started violently banging his head against the wall. His bloodshot eyes looked like those of a beast. However, I couldn't back down either. I shouted back at him, trying to suppress him. The duty officer came running in alarm. The deputy in charge of this area also rushed over. The officer grabbed my arm while blinking and led me toward the exit. And as I followed along, pretending to be unable to resist, I heard the voice of staff members soothing the raging inmate reach my ears.
"Hey, please, you need to endure this."
My steps stopped. Wait, who are they telling to endure? Without a single word to me, they're actually telling the violent criminal in solitary to endure. The world has turned completely upside down. I forcibly returned to the office and was cooling my anger when the emergency bell rang. Checking the location, it was precisely that cell where we had just fought. I rushed there with the mobile strike team, looking into that guy's solitary cell through the window bars. Oh no. Hadn't he sewn up his own eyes with the needle and thread given to him for sewing, and with black thread at that, so it would show clearly? Although I had often heard that violent criminals self-harm, seeing it directly with my own eyes made my legs tremble and my stomach churn, but I couldn't lose either. Rather, I put on an even more dignified expression, put strength in my lower abdomen, and scolded loudly. "Hey, what are you doing? Won't you undo it right now? Huh?" No matter how much I shouted and scolded, there was no response. "Are you really not going to listen? Hey, you bastard." After a long while, what came out of that guy's mouth was,
"If you keep bothering me, I'll sew up my mouth too."
I was inwardly shocked, but I thought, even if eyes can be sewn because the skin is thin, how could he do that with his thick mouth? So I shot back. "If you're going to sew it, go ahead and sew it."
"Will you take responsibility?"
"Hey kid, you're sewing your own mouth. Why should I take responsibility? Do as you please." The guy's complexion turned menacing. He fumbled under the windowsill with his hand and suddenly grabbed something. Looking closely, it was an oversized toothpick made by breaking a bamboo chopstick and sharpening it on the cement floor. Before I could stop him, he grabbed his upper and lower lips and pierced them from bottom to top like skewering meat with the sharp bamboo chopstick. With both eyes sewn shut and even his lips sewn, he sat before me dripping blood. Before him, having done something unimaginable for a human being yet strutting proudly, I lost my words and glared when staff members rushed over and pulled my arm resentfully.
"I told you, Chief. Why do you keep provoking him to cause an incident? Please come this way."
And then they spoke toward the cell again.
"Please, you need to endure."
Returning to the office, various thoughts swirled through my head. What a strange place. How will I endure here? They say even migratory birds flying through the sky cannot pass over this Cheongsong Detention Center. The toxic energy spewed by those who have given up on tomorrow at life's dead end rises to the sky like a whirlwind. At that time, I was in my 5th year as a deacon. However, I was a deacon in name only. My thoughts and actions were no different from an unbeliever. I regarded God not as an actually existing deity, but merely as an object of religious belief in church. Hallelujah! Whenever the pastor and church members raised their right hands high and shouted this at every opportunity, my head throbbed. Where exactly is God anyway? Isn't the church members' talk of a living God regarding this illusory existence created by humans just a shallow deception to comfort themselves and find refuge in it? How is Jesus different from Buddha, Muhammad, or Confucius? To me, God was merely Israel's founding deity, nothing less. Just as Buddhism, which originated in India, flowed into our country, the Jehovah religion founded in Israel merely became Christianity for us, and I believe that religion fulfilled its original meaning simply by making hearts comfortable and living virtuously. So I always criticized my wife, who prayed and served diligently, as blindly fanatical. Who's listening just because you pray? Stop talking nonsense. There are countless people praying. How could God possibly hear all those prayers? Prayer is nothing more than self-satisfaction, catharsis. Yet, having attended church for a long time, I had become quite soaked in church culture. As time passed, the work woven from ingrained familiarity and unbelief was truly a spectacle. With faith in God or longing for holiness at levels beyond any expectation from the start, living according to worldly standards the moment I left the church was utterly natural to me. An average of 1.5 packs of chain smoking daily, drinking skills that didn't discriminate by type, playing Go Stop whenever there was a chance, fishing, tennis, Go, Jangi, etc. All sorts of pastimes never left my side. The more conflict raged in my heart, the more tenaciously I clung to these things. The world is all like this anyway. Just live somehow, and when it ends, that's it. Life is worthless. I was transforming into a severe cynic and skeptic. A life of following the world day and night, mingling with workplace colleagues, continued. I boasted that human relationships are best forged at good drinking tables, arbitrarily interpreting and practicing the true meaning of magnanimity. With a cigarette in my mouth, downing liquor without hesitation, playing Huatu well and having fun, my colleagues called me a dandy.
If you're going to believe in Jesus, you should believe like Chief Park. Isn't he so big-hearted and cool? He goes to church, but enjoys all the fun things separately. Such a broad-minded person.
I was proud of these words. The people in church who tediously talked only about grace seemed like cheapskates instead. While indulging in alcohol, tobacco, gambling, and experiencing everything the world considered good, I wasn't ashamed to act as a church member. In this situation, clashing with violent detainees, our relationship couldn't possibly be friendly. I dealt with them with extreme wariness, and they raised the banner of struggle high against me, the newly appointed factory supervisor. Every detainee I encountered had cold looks and strange sneers at the corners of their mouths. Terrifying incidents followed one after another, and as staff morale hit rock bottom, the inmates' extremism increasingly pierced the sky. Sewing up one's own eyes and mouth was merely a childish incident. Countless self-harm incidents and hostage situations occurred one after another, truly difficult to handle. Some inmates would slash their bellies wildly with knives or glass shards, bleeding profusely while screaming at the top of their lungs. It was fortunate if only the skin was torn, but sometimes, when intestines protruded, they wouldn't blink an eye and would push them back in forcefully with their palms. Someone else would swallow dozens of needles, grab their belly, and threaten to twist it like wringing laundry. Some would threaten to stick their fingers in their eyes and pull out their eyeballs. Once, someone sliced up his own tongue with shards from a broken fluorescent bulb, turning it into a rag. He was transferred to a general hospital and underwent major surgery lasting several hours before the stitching was finally completed. Later, I asked him, "Hey, why did you slice your tongue of all things? You're big, so your buttocks and thighs are wide too. Why not slice there? What crime did your tongue commit?"
Oh, Chief, you really don't know anything. The hardest part of the human body for doctors to sew is precisely the tongue. The tongue is made of spongy tissue, so no matter how skilled the doctor, the needle doesn't go in easily, doesn't catch easily. Whoever that doctor was must have cursed plenty while sewing up my tongue.
It was disgusting even to look at with open eyes. Even the lowest creatures have an instinct to preserve their lives, so how could humans possibly commit such extreme acts? However, I soon came to understand them committing such atrocious acts. Most of them were orphans who grew up in unfortunate circumstances, accidentally stepped into the criminal world, and were branded as ex-convicts. Even after release, they reoffended second, third, seventh, 10th time. While spinning the wheel of repeated imprisonment and release, they were suddenly caught in the snare of the newly enacted Social Protection Act and became detainees, with nothing to their name and no one to welcome them. Any lingering attachment to the world had completely disappeared. Even a considerable number of families abandoned them. Supporting someone through 1 or 2 prison terms already dried the bones of the whole family and exhausted the household wealth. But exhausted by the grand procession of repeated imprisonments, families severed blood ties with revulsion and left without word. A bleak life with nothing whatsoever to comfort them during the long confinement period. In their hearts, despair and self-torture naturally piled up like mountains.
The country abandoned us. My family abandoned me too.
The desperate feeling of being abandoned by everyone eventually made them give up even on themselves. There was no will to live today and no hope for tomorrow. They merely showed animalistic reactions to their present reality.
A life that'll end trampled like weeds anyway. My dog-like life, living like a beast and dying like a beast. Just live however I feel like and go,
was their mindset. Their reckless lives were uncontrollable even by orders and laws. As desperation became routine and a state of mental panic spread like an epidemic, discipline and order within the detention center relatively weakened. A culture prevailed where even correctional officers turned a blind eye to most rule violations. Rationalizing with, "Do you avoid shit because you're scared of it? You avoid it because it's dirty." Repeatedly witnessing the inmates' deteriorating state daily and concerned that this couldn't continue, like-minded staff members gathered. Particularly Deputy Park and Deputy Ju were people burning with a sense of justice, filled with conviction that discipline must be restored. Every day we rotated between each person's house, fiercely discussing how we could correct this disorder. The conclusion was only one. The way to defeat these evil people is for us to become more evil. The way to control these cruel people is also for us to become more cruel. To suppress these violent and merciless people, we must become more violent and merciless. Eventually, we chose the method of ruling by force. The odds of winning were more than sufficient. We had uniforms bestowed by the state, laws we could justly enforce. In the worst case, we even had the authority to use weapons. We began dealing with rebellious detainees with harsh discipline. Extreme resistance followed along with more severe riots and self-harm than usual. But we didn't forgive even the slightest rule violation if caught. Punishment, punishment, more punishment. We dealt especially harshly with those who resisted and sometimes committed illegal acts of wielding clubs. I discovered myself becoming so violent that even I thought it excessive, but my temperament had already become uncontrollable like an arrow that left the bow. I began hating all the detainees in the daily repeated fights. Just seeing the clothes they wore ignited hostility in me. "What have you done? You entered homes with knives and stole in one night everything that good people accumulated through lifelong hardship, attacked sleeping people with all kinds of threats and extortion, leaving permanent scars, dishonored women before their whole families, destroying households. What great things have you accomplished to be acting arrogant even here?" I hated them. Hatred boiled over. I didn't want to forgive anyone. Force against force. No matter how much the detainees raged, the outcome was already decided. We arrested rule violators prepared to die. Before us dealing harshly with them, their defiant resistance was eventually suppressed. Law and order regained authority, and staff instructions and orders took effect. I was always proud of this. It was hard work, but wasn't it I who achieved this merit? I strutted with my shoulders squared. The detainees gave me the nickname Chief Park from hell for dealing with them viciously. It made me feel good to hear that. I accepted it proudly as meaning they acknowledged my strong power. I was even proud before the nickname Cold Sun. Then one day, after work, when I returned home for dinner, sitting at the dinner table, I suddenly looked at my wife eating with me. Choi Sunju, a woman who bore me a son and daughter, and lived through much hardship meeting an inadequate husband. Suddenly, didn't that woman I had loved and cherished so much feel like a complete stranger? With a puzzled heart, I repeatedly looked at my wife's face, but the more I did, the more awkward it felt. She was definitely my wife, yet the indifference of regarding her like a stranger made me inwardly flustered. This was the first time for such a thing, but that wasn't all. Even looking at my sleeping young children, no emotion arose. Though the peacefully sleeping children were definitely my offspring, the love I should feel as a father didn't arise. They say even hedgehogs think their young are the prettiest in the world. It's probably a temporary phenomenon caused by work being too hard lately and severe stress. After some time passes and I rest well, it'll get better. At first, I thought this simply. However, this state worsened as time passed. Coming home and facing my family's faces was like torture, especially when my young children clung to both arms and kissed my cheeks. And I held them without any emotion. At those times, I hated myself enough to want to die. Why am I really like this? Is it my time to die? My family didn't notice my suffering at all. On days when I wanted to avoid facing that family and avoid going home, the only place I could go was a bar. Days increased when I drank with staff until my nose twisted, then was led home by their hands. I had fallen into a terrible abyss where I could only sustain life by collapsing and losing consciousness. A daily routine of barely getting up with an exhausted body, commuting, fighting with detainees all day in an irritated mood. The closer to quitting time, the more suffocating my heart. Briefly stopping by home only to change clothes, then running out as if escaping and wandering from bar to bar. And a vicious cycle of wandering continued, drinking all night until finally becoming unconscious and being dragged home not knowing how I got there. One day, trying to stand up completely drunk, a large aquarium in the corner of the bar caught my eye. Looking at the fish playing in the water, tears welled up in my eyes. Fish, you're better off than me. You just eat what's given in the water, and when your time comes, you die, and that's it, right? But when I go home, I'm a husband and dad. When I go to work, I'm a senior staff member. And when I go to church, I'm deacon. To others' eyes, it all looks plausible, but I have no idea who I am. Finally, tears streamed down. I feel like I'm surrounded by more layers than onion skin. No matter how much I peel and peel away, it's all just layers to the end. My heart is so shattered that I can't even love my children or wife, and I can't help it either. As I stroked the aquarium glass, crying profusely, staff members dragged me home and muttered sympathetically,
Chief Park has completely lost it. I thought he'd been getting worse lately. Now he's reached the point of getting drunk with fish.
In my flickering consciousness, I cried out inwardly. That's not it. You don't know. Nobody knows my heart. However, that was only a scream erupting from within. My flickering consciousness once again plummeted headlong into hell's abyss.